I've been thinking a lot about the Elder Scrolls 6. And that is because we are in the part of the Bethesda news cycle where the fact that they acknowledge that they exist and are like, hey, this is still going to be a great year for Starfield. That's newsworthy at this point. But hey, I'm not the only one thinking a ton about this. We've had leaks regarding the Elder Scrolls 6 that didn't turn out to be leaks. They just turned out to be fake leaks from 5 months ago that were being re-reported now because, again, that's how desperate we are. But there are parts of those leaks that make sense, and then there's stuff like the upcoming Xbox console, because yes, there is a new Xbox console that is allegedly coming in 2026, and now people are speculating, because of timelines we know, that maybe the Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be the game that launches with it. But then at the same time, if this is going to be a great year for Starfield, how much are they even working on the Elder Scrolls 6? What is happening with it? Should we be excited for it? What about Starfield? And there's a lot of fact, there's a lot of fiction, and there's a lot of stuff that I think we need to talk about, because I don't have high hopes for pretty much anything at this point, but we still should look at why I don't have high hopes and why I really don't think you should. So hi, I'm Mug, and if you're new here, welcome, and if you're not new here, welcome back. It's nice to see you. Now, if at any point you enjoyed this video, you know that you should hit the like button, but speaking of liking, I especially like who we've partnered up with for this video today, and a different version of me is going to tell you about that. Now, for those of you who know the channel, you probably know that I am exceptionally passionate about video games, probably to an unhealthy degree, and about this industry, but there are other things that I'm passionate about, and one of those is privacy. Which leads me to today's partner, NordVPN. Now, most of you guys know what a VPN is, but for those of you who don't, a VPN allows you to connect to the internet in a safer way by routing your connection through other places and encrypting a lot of your information. And this matters because in today's world, everybody wants your data. Be that companies, marketers, your ISP, and of course more malicious people as well, from scammers and hackers to people using phishing and ransomware out there. And even though I'm very worried about all of these things, I also acknowledge that I'm lazy, which is why I use NordVPN. It is genuinely one click to set up and get it working, and it's very easy to customize if you wanted to use any of its other features, including Threat Protection Pro, which guards you from a ton of those dangerous scams that are out there on the internet. And NordVPN has thousands of servers across the world, so no matter from where you want to connect from, you can, including to bypass some of those restrictions from streaming platforms or certain websites that you might not have access to, depending on where you're living. One of my personal favorites is that you can activate your NordVPN account on 10 different devices, which means that I get to also protect my mom and my dad, which are some of the more vulnerable people when it comes to navigating the web. And I'm going to be very straight up and honest with you guys. I had thought about getting a VPN for an incredibly long time, and I didn't pull the trigger until last year. And since then, I was genuinely amazed at just having something on my phone or on my browser that's one click away and gives me that extra added layer of security. And ever since I started using NordVPN, I haven't looked back. And that is why you can use my link below to get 4 extra months on your NordVPN subscription today. You have a 30-day money-back guarantee, and they guarantee that this is the best offer that you can get on NordVPN through creators here on YouTube, because yes, they do support the YouTube community as well. Don't underestimate the value of your privacy, check the link below, and thank you again to NordVPN for partnering up for this video. Thank you, different version of me. Now look, let's get the big stuff out of the way. Yes, Bethesda has said that they are working on Starfield, which I don't know what that means. I mean, we do. It means that they're working on Starfield, but like, does that matter? The last thing that we got from Starfield was Shattered Space, and it really put into perspective just how unsuccessful Starfield kind of was. Here was a brand new shiny expansion to Starfield, and it really didn't make any sort of splash. Pretty much nobody played it, I believe. At least when we look at player counts, it doesn't seem like a lot of people return for it, since Skyrim continues to have way more players than Starfield, even with the hype that would accompany an expansion. And for as much as people will say that Skyrim is an evergreen game and has a million mods to it and all of that, it's still pretty surprising that people who enjoy Bethesda's style of game didn't even return for Shattered Space. Now, that's a pretty good thing, because Shattered Space is not very good, as I've said. But that isn't stopping Bethesda from committing to the plan that they had all the way back since launch of they are going to keep supporting Starfield and they are going to continue releasing content for it and theoretically have another expansion in the works. And I really think that at this point in time, we're sitting at a pretty important crossroad of where Bethesda might be heading with their next game. There's a lot of things in the air, but primarily those are three things: technology, evolution, and direction. And we're going to look at all three of those things to get a better sense of where we're headed and what they're doing. And for me, the most interesting part of these three is the direction, the design that Bethesda will commit to. And here's the thing. Bethesda has been very flip-floppy, and while all three of the topics kind of cross over at some point, the direction and the design is one that you can see pretty clearly on its own. A great example of this is Fallout 4, a game that a lot of us really didn't enjoy until it got significantly reworked or improved through the use of mods and stuff like that. But for many of us, it felt like they had left the RPG side of things a bit behind to focus on a shooter. A lot of the things that at least I personally care the most about in a Bethesda-style RPG, which are things like reactivity of the world and my choices mattering throughout it, and the overall complexity and depth of the story and how I could impact it, seemed to take a very clear backseat to, look, shoot things, loot things, mod your guns, and set up settlements. But this is where a lot of the flip-floppiness comes in, because if we look at something like Far Harbor, that is a great example of Bethesda going back to a reactive world, something a lot more controlled, where the emphasis was more on the story, on how your decisions would impact that story and affect everything that went on having lasting consequences, and decisions that you had to sit and think about a bit more, with very cool implications for the world overall, instead of, for example, the main story of Fallout 4. They even went as far as to make a lot of the reactivity in Far Harbor be impactful to a lot of the companions from base Fallout 4, and that's a very radical shift in design. And you could attribute it to them not knowing what to do during Fallout 4, or you could also say that they were so hyper-focused on a lot of the elements of Fallout 4 as being the future of their games, which is understandable because at the core of everything, they still are systems-based, even if it's systems that maybe we didn't want from them as much. And then after that, they refocused and were like, oh, well, there's a lot about our games in general, right? They're very big things that a lot of people like for different reasons. And while we might have satisfied a lot of people with what is in Fallout 4, the base game, we have not satisfied a lot of the other things. Let's do something for that. Let's do something more on the story RPG reactive side of the world. And you might normally think, oh wow, that's like a lesson that they should learn and then take with them moving forward. But no, this is Bethesda. So we got to see the same exact thing happen with Starfield, a game that is arguably even more systems based than something like Fallout 4, and that does move a lot of its stuff forward, but it even more so abandoned a lot of the stuff that people wanted. It sacrificed a lot of the essential parts of a Bethesda game in order to make the space simulation come to light. Exploration was severely neutered, reactivity was reduced. I'm one of the people who thinks that a lot of the mission design in Starfield, of like the actual quests and the set piece based stuff, is actually pretty cool and pretty fun, but not its story, not its reactivity, not the way that a lot of things do. I think Starfield gets a lot of bad word of mouth, and most of it is deserved, but I also think that the few things that it does well, nobody like pays attention to. Like, it does make the action style, like linear story set pieces better if you want to look at it like that, which is something that is very much applauded in other games like Cyberpunk, for example. It did address stuff like being the most powerful person in the universe, like in Skyrim being omnipowerful, but you don't get recognized by it. That's one of like the flaws in reactivity, and Starfield directly tries to address that. But overall, it sacrificed so much of what these games were, including that sense of exploration and a world that is more reactive, and a lot of the more traditional things that people had come to expect from Bethesda when looking at Oblivion, Fallout 3, Skyrim. And along came Shattered Space, which is just another great example of Bethesda flip-flopping. It is them straight up saying that they acknowledge that they didn't provide a lot of the things that people wanted from their sort of game, and here is a completely handcrafted open world for you to explore that is going to be more focused on its reactivity, on how things work here, on telling a more tight, concise story, and with a structure that could have been taken straight out of a Fallout 3 DLC, or a New Vegas DLC, or a Fallout 4 DLC. You go to a new area, completely self-contained, you solve the problems there with a story that is mostly self-contained, completely handcrafted area, very different from what base Starfield offers, and then you move on with your life. But the problem with Shattered Space is that they failed at doing that, in my opinion. They basically did the most bare bones version possible of what they have always done. The structure that you've come to expect from any of their other DLCs, the very basic way that a lot of the story works, you can see the reactivity and the choices that are thrown your way from a mile away, and you pretty much know where everything is headed right from the drop, and even there, the reactivity and the world building is not up to par with not just other contemporaries that are trying to do this, but with Bethesda's old games as well. I would rather play Point Lookout than Shattered Space, let's put it that way. So this leads to a very big question. Which version of Bethesda are we getting? Are we getting the recent Fallout 4 and Starfield Bethesda that's going to try and create a world that pushes, I guess, new technology, at least for them, puts in all of these systems and still abandons, once again, a lot of the things that people want from them, just to reintroduce them in updates and the season pass? Or have they learned their lesson and really understood from, for example, the very bad feedback to Shattered Space, that it's not the idea of Shattered Space that is amiss, it's the execution. The idea is exactly what we want. And at this point, I think it's a coin toss, because the reaction to Starfield definitely is informing the design of the Elder Scrolls 6. The Elder Scrolls 6 was not in production by the time Starfield came out. We know this for a fact, that the Elder Scrolls 6 only entered full production after Starfield launched, which means that there is time to react to that, and we know that the team reacted to Starfield by, hey, we acknowledge the mistakes, we're going to focus more on the handcrafted stuff that you like. And if that is the same philosophy that they went into production of the Elder Scrolls 6 with, we might see Bethesda do something good. But with their flip-floppy nature, who knows? Now, informing all of this is evolution. In other words, how they carry forward ideas and try to refine them or re-implement them or make them work better in their game world. This has been a Bethesda classic. You know, again, they're systems-based games. When they design a completely new system that can more or less be slotted into the sandbox that they create, they want to keep putting that system in the future. It doesn't matter if we're talking about the overall RPG leveling structure, if we're talking about crafting and modifying weapons and armor. It doesn't matter if we're talking about how you can have your own home. It doesn't matter if it's the settlements and the town building aspect of things. They really like to carry a lot of that stuff forward from game to game and refine. And the problem is that when we sit and look at Starfield and what we can move forward from that game that was truly new to it, is not looking good. Because it's two things that I think are probably, in Bethesda's mind, linked together even though they don't need to. And one is procedural generation, which is in many ways the biggest crime that Starfield commits. And the other is ships. It's flying ships, it's the vehicle combat, it's the customization, it's how it blends having a home with, you know, having your own ship. So this is very lightly tied to one of those fake leaks that we saw in the past, because even though that leak is not reputable or confirmed or anything like it, it did contain, like, let's be honest, some of those leaks literally were like, the game will have quests and will have combat. But one of the more interesting parts of it was the idea that you would have a boat. Look at that, also known as a ship, and that you would be able to customize your ship, and that then you could sail the seas and, this makes actually a lot of sense. Because Bethesda would very much like to move a lot of the technology that they have from Starfield in customizing your ship into the next game. Which, if we're going to be in the Elder Scrolls 6, and especially if rumors are to be believed surrounding it being in High Rock or Hammerfell or both, I mean, hey, a ship could make a lot of sense. You can customize your boat, do your stuff, go out there into the open seas and explore stuff. The problem is, if the procedural generation also moves forward and is applied to, for example, that ship exploration, there's a lot of potential of what could be done there. It could be a main part of the game and be absolutely terrible, like in Starfield. It could be just some side activity for loot or something, or like, I don't know, a roguelite mode, who knows? And that would be more acceptable. But in my opinion, none of that would be ideal, because the ideal would be that all of the seas are mapped and have cool stuff to explore in them. When you think of it that way, you're like, oh wow, this is really exciting. That would be awesome. I think about something like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where you have your own ship and there's a ton of stuff to explore, but it's all handcrafted and leads to cool stuff. And I don't understand how the Ubisoft team that made Assassin's Creed Odyssey can pull that off, but Bethesda couldn't. The point is, and the scary thing is, that Bethesda really likes to carry over a lot of what they do forward. So the idea of having like a central base where you have your crew and you go on your adventures with, the idea that when you do that sort of stuff, you're going to procedurally generated areas, or that procedural generation is used in some form to craft the world, is very likely and very scary, because it would be weird that one of the most important parts of Starfield, which was that massive exploration promise, were to just be abandoned. And that idea of the overall world and procedural generation and what happens with it is also directly tied to technology. Look, this is a very uncomfortable conversation to keep having, but how is the creation engine still a thing? I've got a separate video because sometimes, these topics are just so sprawling that you have to kind of focus where you can, but so many games exist now that do so many things that Bethesda has done before better. Sure, none of them do all of the things, but is that good enough? Is doing all of the things but not as good worth it? Jacks of all trades, are they really what we want? At this point, when I think of great reactivity in a world, I think of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. When I think of great combat in an immersive sim-style game like Bethesda could be classified in, I think of Cyberpunk compared to Fallout, and I think of Avowed compared to Skyrim. Which, yes, Avowed, not a good game, not an RPG, but its combat is actually, good. It's the one thing I kept thinking while playing through all of Avowed is, if you put this movement and this combat in an Elder Scrolls game, you need to have everything else, of course. This can only be a small part of the game, comparatively. But if it were this good, it would be such a huge jump forward. I think of other games that are looking to risk stuff when it comes to exploration and systems and how that works in a lot of their level design. So I think of stuff like Tainted Grail, and I've been playing a bit of Outward recently, and those are some really interesting games in what they do. But the most interesting part about all of that is that games like Tainted Grail and Avowed are on the Unreal Engine, that Cyberpunk is on the Red Engine, which is now gone in favor of the Unreal Engine for the next CD Projekt Red project. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 is on CryEngine. And they managed to pull off all of these such important things that Bethesda keeps saying over and over and over again, that their sorts of world are only possible using the creation engine, that it is an essential part of everything that they do. Because it's been like that for a very long time. They've just been iterating on it. And I think that they've convinced themselves that this engine is the necessary component at the heart that makes their games tick. And I think that's a fundamental mistake, because it isn't. And the engine and its limitations are very clear. This is something that I think people need to be more aware of. One of the main reasons that the industry is shifting towards using other people's engines is because you have gigantic companies dedicated to working on those engines. on facilitating, as a dedicated job, more tools, more flexibility, and more streamlining, more everything for the use of their engine so that you can accomplish your vision with it. Now, of course, there's always going to be bruises coming up with that because you might have a very specific vision that just can't be fulfilled by some of these engines. But then you have to outweigh that with creating your own engine, which the problem with that is that it's very expensive, very complicated, very often not going to be worth it at all financially in the future. And if you want to do new things in your games, you then have to put a whole load of resources into updating and pushing that engine forward. And that is what Bethesda has been doing, and that does take up a substantial amount of resources and changes the entire development pipeline of a game in service of what the engine can or can't do, or what it needs to be modified in order to do. And look, I know about game development to a point, so I cannot tell you to the same degree that modders that have been doing stuff with the creation engine for such a long time can tell you about it. But I can tell you that a lot of the bigger flaws that we see present in games like Starfield, be that loading screens and, the cells system and all of these things, are responsible for some of the limitations that we see in these games, and they are essentially bolting on more and more and more stuff onto this engine in order to have it feel more modern in things like its movement systems, in how the camera works, and how the interactions with other people work, and just so many things. And I do not want to undersell what a crazy job Bethesda has done with their engine. The way that they have pushed it and evolved it time after time is frankly just mind-blowing. But you know that there were resources invested in that to a degree that is ridiculous. And when you see someone like CD Projekt Red, that their engine ended up actually working well, it took a hell of a lot of time. I'm not one of those people that'll be like, Cyberpunk was fine when it released. No, it was garbage. It was absolutely terrible. But if you look at Cyberpunk today, and you look at Phantom Liberty, and you play that game, you're like, this is amazing. Like, this has a great feel to the movement, to the shooting, to the melee, to the stealth, to everything, like, to the driving. You guys have nailed so much of it, and it all works in this, like, Cyberpunk 2077 today is an incredible game. And they're moving away from their engine. They're like, no, it's not worth it for us to keep investing in this. We're just going to do Unreal Engine. And all sorts of shade thrown at the creation engine. The Red engine and what it's capable of doing is leagues ahead of what the creation engine can showcase in Starfield, and they're abandoning it. But Bethesda is still tying themselves to it. The strangest part about the whole thing is that the Oblivion remake, as far as we know, and this seems pretty certain, is a complete reconstruction of the game in the Unreal Engine. It is not a bolted-on Unreal thing on top. That would kind of be like the Halo remakes, right? Where it's like, it's just the same game, but you have this like graphical toggle that you can put over it. No. This is a completely different studio remaking Oblivion in Unreal Engine. What more proof do you need that the vision of Bethesda's games at this point can be done in other engines that can be pushed further without sucking up so many resources from the studio? How many more Tainted Grails and Avoweds and Cyberpunks do we need in order for them to say, hey, maybe this is not just holding us back, but it's just a considerable resource sink? And at the end, when I look at all of this and I sit down and look at Elder Scrolls 6, I don't know where it might be headed, but I don't get an overall good feeling. Because it's coming and it's not gonna take too long. So, back to those rumors on the new Xbox. Yeah, if they launched it with an exclusive Elder Scrolls 6 on PC as well, because like, let's not go crazy, right? But not releasing it on PlayStation, not releasing it on Switch 2, I guess. New Xbox, day one, you have an Elder Scrolls 6 available on it. Yes, Elder Scrolls 6 could be massive, and it could be an actual system seller. Like back to the days where we had real system sellers. Like for me, the last time that I felt like I needed to buy a console in order to play a game was I guess the 360? Maybe the Wii U, but that's because I really like Bayonetta. Like, yeah, I bought a Switch to play Breath of the Wild, but I had a Wii U. So I don't even know at this point. But this could be like harkening back to those days of like, if you don't have a PC that can run the Elder Scrolls 6, you're gonna buy a console because that's just how big the franchise is. Like, it's the people who made Skyrim, guys. It's the sequel to Skyrim. It's gonna sell. But if that is the plan moving forward, that's rapidly approaching, and we still don't know anything except that they're still hammering away at Starfield. So even through all of this speculation, it doesn't sound good, and Bethesda ain't out here quelling our concerns. Instead, I think I'm more worried than I've ever been. All of this to say, I would not have high hopes for the Elder Scrolls 6 at the moment unless they show us something very different very soon. But man, I said it back when I reviewed Shattered Space. I think Bethesda's pretty much dead, and they really need to step up their game if they're gonna rise from the grave. Insert gaming journalism meme of return to form here. I've been Mug, and this was more of a speculative vision on like Bethesda's internals and how they work and what we can more or less expect. But I have an upcoming video kind of examining the Scrolls-like genre in its totality and all of the systems around it that make it what it is. So if you want to, you can subscribe for that. I make a lot of videos about all sorts of video games on the channel. One of the strangest variety channels on YouTube, but I promise it's worth it. So yeah, help me beat GameSpot in subscribers. You know who does that already? The patrons on the $1 patron wall, who I love with all of my heart. Thank you so much for your support day in and day out. Go out there, enjoy some great video games, and I will see you again very soon.